Chapter 6. The Mangaboos Prove Dangerous. When the wizard awoke, the six-colored suns were shining down on the land of the Mangaboos, just as they had done ever since his arrival. The little man, having slept a good sleep, felt rested and refreshed, and looking through the glass partition of the room, he saw Zeb sitting up on his bench and yawning. So the wizard went into him.
"Zeb," he said, "my balloon is no further use in this strange country, so I may as well leave it to the square where it fell. But in the basket car there are some things I would like to keep with me. I wish you would go and fetch my satchel, 2 lanterns, and a can of kerosene oil that is under the seat. There is nothing else I care about."
So the boy went willingly upon the errand, and by the time he had returned, Dorothy was awake. Then the three held a council to decide what they should do next, but could think of no way to better their condition.
"I don't like these vegetable people," said the little girl. "They're cold and flabby like cabbages, in spite of their prettiness."
"I agree with you. It is because there is no warm blood in them," remarked the wizard.
"And they have no hearts, so they can't love anyone, not even themselves," declared the boy. "The princess is lovely to look at," continued Dorothy thoughtfully, "but I don't care much for her, after all. If there was any other place to go, I'd like to go there."
"But is there any other place?" asked the wizard.
"I don't know," she answered.
Just then they heard a big voice of Jim, the cab horse, calling to them, and going to the doorway leading to the dome, they found the princess and a throng of her people had entered the house of the sorcerer. So they went down to greet the beautiful vegetable lady, who said to them, "I have been talking with my advisors about you, the meat people, and have decided that you do not belong in the land of the Mangaboos and must not remain here."
"Well, how can we go away?" asked Dorothy. "Oh, you cannot go away, of course. You must be destroyed," was the answer.
"In what way?" inquired the wizard.
"We shall throw you 3 people into the garden of the twinning vines," said the princess, "and they will soon crush you and devour your bodies to make themselves grow bigger. The animals you have with you we will drive to the mountains and put in the Black Pit. Then our country will be rid of its unwelcome visitors."
"But you are in need of a sorcerer," said the wizard, "and not one of those growing is yet ripe to pick. I am greater than any thorn-covered sorcerer that you ever knew in your garden. Why destroy me?"
"It is true we need a sorcerer," acknowledged the princess, "but I am informed that one of your own will be ready to pick in a few days, and take the place of Gwig, whom you cut in 2 pieces before it was time for him to be planted. Let us see your arts and the sorceries you are able to perform. Then I will decide whether to destroy you with the others or not."
At this, the wizard made a bow to the people and repeated his trick of producing the 9 tiny piglets and making them disappear again. He did it very cleverly indeed, and the princess looked at the strange piglets as if she were truly astonished that any vegetable person could be. But afterwards she said, "I have heard of this wonderful magic, but it accomplishes nothing of value. What else can you do?" The wizard tried to think. Then he jointed together the blades of his sword and balanced it very skillfully on the end of his nose. But even that did not satisfy the princess. Just then his keen eyes fell upon the lanterns and can of kerosene oil which Zeb had brought from the car of his balloon, and he got a clever idea from those commonplace things.
"Your Highness," said he, "I will now proceed to prove my magic by creating 2 suns that you have never seen before. Also, I will exhibit a destroyer much more dreadful than your clinging vines."
So he placed Dorothy upon one side of him, and the boy upon the other, and set a lantern upon each of their heads.
"Don't laugh," he whispered to them, "or you will spoil the effect of my magic."
Then, with much dignity and a look of vast importance upon his wrinkled face, the wizard got out his matchbox and lighted the 2 lanterns. The glare was very small when compared to the radiance of the 6 great colored suns, but they still gleamed steadily and clearly. The Mangaboos were much impressed because they had never before seen any lights that had not come directly from their suns. Next the wizard poured a pool of oil from the can upon the glass floor, where it covered quite a broad surface. When he lighted the oil, 100 tongues of flame shot up, and the effect was really imposing.
"Now, Princess," examined the wizard, Those of your advisors who wish to throw us into the garden of clinging vines must step within the circle of light. If they advise you well and were in the right, they will not be injured in any way. But if any advise you wrongly, the light will wither them.
The advisors of the princess did not like this test, but she commanded them to step into the flame, and one by one they did so, and were scorched so badly that the air was soon filled with the odor like that of baked potatoes. Some of the Mangaboos fell down and had to be dragged from the fire, and all were so withered that it would be necessary to plant them at once.
"Sir," said the princess to the wizard, "you are greater than any sorcerer we have ever known. As it is evident that my people have advised me wrongly, I will not cast you 3 people into the dreadful garden of the clinging vines, but your animals must be driven into the black pit in the mountain, for my subjects cannot bear to have them around."
The wizard was so pleased to have saved the 2 children himself that he said nothing against the decree, but when the princess had gone, both Jem and Eureka protested they did not want to go to the black pit, and Dorothy promised she would do all she could to save them from such a fate. For 2 or 3 days after this, if we call days the periods between sleep, there being no night to divide the hours into days, our friends were not disturbed in any way. They were even permitted to occupy the house of the sorcerer in peace, as if it had been their own, and to wander in the gardens in search of food. Once they came near to the enclosed garden of the clinging vines, and walking high into the air looked down upon it with much interest. They saw a mass of tough green vines, all matted together and writhing and twisting around like a great nest of snakes. Everything the vines touched they crushed, and our adventurers were indeed thankful to have escaped being cast among them. Whenever the wizard went to sleep, he would take the 9 tiny piglets from his pocket and let them run around on the floor of his room to amuse themselves and get some exercise. And one time they found a glass door ajar, and they wandered into the hall, and then into the bottom part of the great dome, walking through the air as easily as Eureka could. They knew the kitten by this time, so they scampered over to where she lay beside Jem and commenced to frisk and play with her. The cab horse, who never slept long at a time, sat upon his haunches and watched the tiny piglets and the kitten with much approval. "Don't be rough," he would call out, if Eureka knocked over one of the round, fat piglets with her paw. But the pigs never minded, and enjoyed the sport very greatly. Suddenly they looked up to find the room filled with the silent, solemn-eyed Mangaboos. Each of the vegetable folks bore a branch covered with sharp thorns, which was thrust defiantly towards the horse, the kitten, and the piglets. "Hey, stop this foolishness!" Jem roared angrily, but after being pricked once or twice, he got up on his 4 legs and kept out of the way of the thorns. The Mangaboos surrounded them in solid ranks, but left an opening to the doorway of the hall, so the animals slowly retreated until they were driven from the room and out upon the street. Here were more of the vegetable people with thorns, and silently they urged the now frightened creatures down the street. Jim had to be careful not to step upon the tiny piglets, who scampered under his feet, grunting and squealing, while Eureka, snarling and biting at the thorns pushed towards her, also tried to protect the pretty little things from injury. Slowly but steadily the heartless Mangaboos drove them on, until they had passed through the city and in the gardens, and had come to a broad plain leading to the mountain. "What does all this mean, anyhow?" asked the horse, jumping to escape the thorn.
"Why, they're driving us towards a black pit into which they threaten to cast us," replied the kitten. "If I were as big as you, Jim, I'd fight these miserable turnip roots."
"What would you do?" inquired Jem.
"I'd kick out those long legs and iron-shod hooves."
"All right," said the horse. "I'll do it." And an instant later he suddenly backed towards a crowd of Mangaboos and kicked out his hind legs as hard as he could. A dozen of them smashed together and tumbled to the ground. And seeing his success, Jim kicked again and again, charging into the vegetable crowd, knocking them in all directions, and sending the others scampering to escape his iron heels. Eureka helped him by flying into the faces of the enemy and scratching and biting furiously, and the kitten ruined so many vegetable complexions that the Mangaboos feared her as much as they did the horse. But the foes were too many to be repulsed for long. They tired Jim and Eureka out, and although the field of battle was thickly covered with mashed and disabled Mangaboos, our animal friends had to give up at last and allow themselves to be driven to the mountain. Chapter 7. Into the Black Pit and Out Again. When they came to the mountain, it proved a rugged, towering chunk of deep green glass that looked dismal and forbidding in the extreme. Halfway up the steep was a yawning cave, black as night beyond the point where the rainbow rays of the colored sun reached into it. The Mangaboos drove the horse and the kitten and the piglets into this dark hole, and then, having pushed the buggy in after them, for it seemed some of them had dragged it all the way from the domed hull, they began to pile big glass rocks within the entrance so that the prisoners could not get out again.
"This is dreadful," groaned Jim. "It will be about the end of our adventures, I guess."
"If only the wizard were here,"
said one of the piglets, sobbing bitterly.
"He could not see us suffer so. We ought to have caught him and Dorothy when they were first attacked,"
nodded Eureka.
"But never mind. Be brave, my friends, and I will go and tell our masters where you are, and get them to come to our rescue."
The mouth of the hole was nearly filled now, but the kitten gave a leap through the remaining opening, and at once scampered up into the air. The Mangaboos saw her escape, and several of them caught up their thorns and gave chase, mounting through the air after her. Eureka, however, was lighter than the Mangaboos, and while they would have mounted about 100 feet above the earth, the kitten found that she could go nearly 200 feet. So she ran over their heads until she had left them far behind and below, and had come to the city and the house of the sorcerer. There she entered at Dorothy's window in the dome, and aroused her from her sleep. As soon as the little girl knew what had happened and awakened the wizard and Zeb, at once the preparations were made to go rescue Jim and the piglets. The wizard carried his satchel, which was quite heavy. Zeb carried the 2 lanterns and the oil can. Dorothy's wicker suitcase was still under the seat of the buggy, and by good fortune the boy had also placed the harness in the buggy when he had taken it off of Jim and let the horse lie down to rest. So there was nothing for the girl to carry but the kitten, which she held close to her bosom and tried to comfort, for its little heart was still beating rapidly. Some of the Mangaboos discovered them as soon as they left the house of the sorcerer, but when they started towards the mountain, the vegetable people allowed them to proceed without interference, yet followed in a crowd behind them so that they could not go back again. Before long, they neared the black pit, where a busy swarm of Mangaboos, headed by their princess, was engaged in piling up glass rocks before the entrance.
"Stop! I command you!"
cried the wizard in an angry tone, and at once began pulling down the rocks to liberate Jim and the piglets. Instead of opposing him in this, they stood back in silence until he had made a good-sized hole in the barrier, when by order of the princess they all sprang forward and thrust out their sharp thorns. Dorothy hopped inside the opening to escape from being pricked, and Zeb and the wizard, after enduring a few stabs from the thorns, were glad to follow her. At once the Mangaboos began piling up the rocks of glass again, and as the little man realized that they were all about to be entombed in the mountain, he said to the children,
"My dears, what shall we do? Jump out and fight?"
"What's the use?" replied Dorothy. "I'd as soon as die here as to live longer among those cruel and heartless people."
"That's the way I feel about it," remarked Zeb, rubbing his wounds. "I've had enough of the Mangaboos." "All right," said the wizard. "I'm with you, whatever you decide. But we can't live long in this cavern, that's certain."
Noticing that the light was growing dim, he picked up his 9 piglets and patted each one lovingly on its fat little head and placed them carefully in his inside pocket. Zeb struck a match and lighted one of the lanterns. The rays of the colored suns were now shut out of them forever, and for the last chinks had been filled up in the wall that separated their prison from the land of the Mangaboos.
"How big is this hole?" asked Dorothy.
"I'll explore it and see," replied the boy. So he carried the lantern back for quite a distance, while Dorothy and the wizard followed at his side. The cavern did not come to an end, as they had expected it would, but slanted upwards to the bright glass mountain, running in the direction that promised to lead them to the opposite side of the Mangaboo country.
"It isn't a bad road," observed the wizard, "and if we followed it, it might lead us to some place that is more comfortable than the black pocket we're in now. I suppose the vegetable folk were always afraid to enter this cavern because it's dark, but we have our lanterns to light the way, so I suppose that we start out and discover where this tunnel in the mountain leads to."
The others agreed readily to the sensible suggestion, and at once the boy began to harness Jim to the buggy. When all was in readiness, all 3 took their seats in the buggy, and Jim started cautiously along the way, Zeb driving while the wizard and Dorothy each held a lighted lantern so the horse could see where to go. Sometimes the tunnel was so narrow that the wheels of the buggy grazed the sides, and then it would broaden out as wide as a street. But the floor was usually smooth, and for a long time they traveled without any accidents. Jim stopped sometimes to rest, for the climb was rather steep and tiresome.
"We must be nearly as high as the six-coat suns by all this time," said Dorothy. "I didn't even know this mountain was so tall." "We certainly did a good distance away from the land of the Mangaboos," added Jim, "for we have slanted away from it ever since we started."
But they kept steadily moving, and just as Jim was about to get tired with his long journey, the way suddenly grew lighter, and Zeb put out the lanterns to save the oil. To their joy, they found it was a white light that now greeted them, for all were wary of the colored rainbow lights, which, after a time, had made their eyes ache with their constantly shifting rays. The sides of the tunnel showed before them like the inside of a long spyglass, and the floor became more level. Jim hastened his lagging steps at this assurance of a quick relief from the dark passage, and in a few moments they were emerged from the mountain and found themselves face to face with a new and charming country. Chapter 8. The Valley of the Voices. By journeying through the glass mountain, they had reached a delightful valley that was shaped like the hollow of a great cup, with another rugged mountain showing on the other side of it, and soft and pretty green hills at the ends. It was all laid out into lovely lawns and gardens, with pebble paths leading through them, and groves of beautiful and stately trees dotting the landscape here and there. There were orchards, too, bearing luscious fruit that are all unknown in our world. Alluring brooks of crystal water flowed sparkling between their flower-strewn banks, while scattering over the valley were dozens of the quaintest and most picturesque cottages our travelers had ever beheld. None of them were in clusters, such as the villages or towns, but each had ample grounds of its own, with orchards and gardens surrounding it. As the new arrivals gazed upon this exquisite scene, they were enraptured by its beauties, and the fragrance that permeated the soft air, which they breathed so gratefully after the confined atmosphere of the tunnel. Several minutes were consumed in silent admiration before they noticed two very singular and unusual facts about this valley. One was that it was lighted by some unseen source, for no sun or moon was in the arched blue sky, although every object was flooded with a clear and perfect light. The second, and even more singular fact, was the absence of any inhabitant of this splendid place. From their elevated position, they could overlook the entire valley, but not a single moving object could they see. All appeared mysteriously deserted. The mountain on this side was not glass, but made of stone similar to granite. With some difficulty and danger, Jim drew the buggy over the loose rocks until he reached the green lawns below, where the paths and orchards and gardens began. The nearest cottage was still some distance away.
"Isn't this fine?"
cried Dorothy in a joyous voice, as she sprang out of the buggy and let Eureka run frolicking over the velvety grass.
"It is indeed,"
answered Zeb.
"We were lucky to get away from those dreadful vegetable people."
"You wouldn't be so bad," remarked the wizard, gazing around him, "if we were obliged to live here always. We couldn't find a prettier place, I'm sure."
He took the piglets from his pocket and let them run on the grass, and Jim tasted a mouthful of the green blades and declared he was very contented in his new surroundings.
"We can't walk in the air, though,"
called Eureka, who had tried it and failed. But the others were satisfied to walk on the ground, and the wizard said they must be nearer to the surface of the earth than they had been in the Mangaboo country, where everything was more homelike and natural.
"But where are all the people?"
asked Dorothy. The little man shook his bald head.
"Can't imagine, my dear,"
he replied. Then they heard a sudden twittering of a bird, but could not find the creature anywhere. Slowly they walked along the path towards the nearest cottage, the piglets racing and gambolling beside them, and Jim pausing every step or so for another mouthful of grass. Presently they came to a low plant which had broad spreading leaves, in the center of which grew a single fruit about as large as a peach. The fruit was so daintily colored and so fragrant, and looked so appetizing and delicious that Dorothy stopped and examined.
"What is it, do you suppose?"
The piglets had smelled the fruit quickly, and before the girl could reach out her hand to pluck it, every one of the tiny ones had rushed in and commenced to devour it with great eagerness.
That's good anyway, said Zeb, or those little rascals wouldn't have gobbled it up so greedily.
Where are they?
Asked Dorothy in astonishment. They looked around, but the piglets had disappeared. Dear me, cried the wizard. They must have run away, but I didn't see them go. Did you?
No,
replied the boy and the girl together. Here, piggy, 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 called their master anxiously. Several squeals and grunts were instantly heard at his feet, but the wizard could not discover a single piglet. Where are you?
right beside you,
spoke a tiny voice.
Can't you see us?
No, answered the little man in a puzzled tone.
I can see you,
said another of the piglets. The wizard stooped down and put out his hand, and once felt a small fat body of one of his pets. He picked it up, but he could not see what he held. This is very strange, he said surlily. The piglets have become invisible in some curious way.
I'll bet it was because of the peach,
said the kitten.
It wasn't the peach, Eureka,
said Dorothy. I don't hope it wasn't poison.
It was fine, Dorothy,
answered one of the piglets.
We'll eat all we can find of them,
said the other. But we mustn't eat them, the wizard warned the children, or we too may become invisible and lose each other. If we come across another of the strange fruit, we must avoid it. Calling the piglets to him, he picked them all up, one by one, and put them in his pocket, for although he could not see them, he could feel them, and when he had buttoned his coat, he knew they were safe for the present. The travelers now resumed their walk toward the cottage, which they presently reached. It was a pretty place, with vines growing thickly over the broad front porch. The door stood open, and a table was set in the front room, with 4 chairs drawn up to it. On the table were plates, knives, and forks, dishes of bread, meat, and fruits. The meat was smoking hot, and the knives and forks were performing strange antics and jumping here and there in a quite puzzling way. But not a single person appeared to be in the room.
How funny,
exclaimed Dorothy, who with Zeb and the wizard now stood in the doorway. A peal of merry laughter answered her, and the knives and forks fell to the plates with a clatter. One of the chairs pushed back from the table, and this was so astonishing and mysterious that Dorothy was almost tempted to run away in fright. "You're strangers, Mamma!" called a shrill and childish voice from some unseen person.
"I see, my dear,"
answered another voice, soft and womanly. "What do you want?" demanded a third voice in a stern, gruff accent. "Well, well," said the wizard. "Are there really people in this room?" "Of course," replied the man's voice. "And pardon me for this foolish question, but are you all invisible?"
"Surely,"
answered the woman, repeating her low, rippling laughter.
"Are you surprised that you are unable to see the people of the Vaux?"
"Why, yes," stammered the wizard. "All the people I have ever met before were very plain to see."
"Where do you come from, then?" asked the woman in a curious tone.
"We belong upon the face of the earth," explained the wizard. "But recently, during an earthquake, we fell down a crack and landed in the country of the Mangaboos."
"Dreadful creatures!" exclaimed the woman's voice. "I've heard of them."
"They walled us up in the mountain," continued the wizard, "but we found there was a tunnel through to this side, so we came here. It is a beautiful place. What do you call it?" "It's the Valley of the Vaux." "Thank you. We have seen no people since we arrived, so we came to this house to inquire our way."
"Are you hungry?"
asked the woman's voice.
"I could eat something." "So could I,"
added Zeb. "But we did not wish to intrude, I assure you," the wizard hastened to say. "It's all right," returned the man's voice, more pleasantly than before. "You're welcome to what we have." He spoke, and the voice came so near to Zeb that he jumped back in alarm. 2 childish voices laughed merrily at this action, and Dorothy was sure they were in no danger among such light-hearted folks, even if these folks couldn't be seen. "What curious animal is that eating grass on my lawn?" inquired the man's voice.
"That's Jim," said the girl. "He's a horse."
"What is he good for?" was the next question.
"He draws the buggy you see fastened to him, and we ride in the buggy instead of walking," she explained.
"Can he fight?" asked the man's voice.
"No, but he can kick pretty hard with his heels and bite a little. But Jim ain't exactly a fight,"
she replied. "Then the bears will get him," said one of the children's voices.
"Bears!"
exclaimed Dorothy.
"Are these bears here?"
There's one evil one in our country, answered the invisible man. Many large and fierce bears roam the valley of Vo, and when they catch any of us, they eat us up. But we cannot see this, so we seldom get caught.
Are the bears invisible too?
Asked the girl. Yes, for they eat the drama fruit, as we all do, and that keeps them from being seen by an eye, either human or animal. Does the drama fruit grow in a low bush and looks something like a peach? Asked the wizard. Yes.
If it makes you invisible, why do you eat it?
Dorothy inquired.
For 2 reasons, my dear, the woman's voice answered. The dama fruit is the most delicious thing that grows, and when it makes us invisible, the bears cannot find us to eat us up. But now, good wanderers, your luncheon is on the table. Please sit down and eat as much as you like.
Chapter 9. They Fight the Invisible Bears. The strangers took their seats at the table willingly enough, for they were all hungry and the platters were now heaped with good things to eat. In front of each place there was a plate bearing one of the delicious dama fruit, and the perfume that rose from these was so enticing and sweet that they were sorely tempted to eat them and become invisible. But Dorothy satisfied her hunger with other things, and her companions did likewise, resisting the temptation.
Why do you not eat the damas?
Asked the woman's voice.
We don't want to get invisible, answered the girl. But if you remain visible, the bears will see you and devour you, said a girlish young voice that belonged to one of the children. But if you remain visible, the bears will see you and devour you, said a girlish young voice that belonged to one of the children. You live here much prefer to be invisible. We can still hug and kiss one another, and are quite safe from the bears.
And we do not have to be particular about dress, remarked the man.
And Mama can't tell if my face is dirty or not,
added another childish voice gleefully.
But I make you wash it every time I think it is, said the mother, and it stands for reason your face is dirty, Anu, whether I can see it or not.
Dorothy laughed and stretched out her hands.
Come here, please, Anu and your sister, and let me feel for you, she requested.
They came to her willingly, and Dorothy passed her hands over their faces and the forms, and decided one was a girl of about her own age, and the boy is somewhat smaller. The girl's hair was soft and fluffy, and her skin was smooth as satin. Dorothy gently touched her nose and ears and lips. They seemed to be well and delicately formed.
I wish I could see you, and I'm sure you would be beautiful, she declared.
The girl laughed, and her mother said,
We are not vain in the Valley of Vo, because we do not display our beauty, and good actions and pleasant ways are what make us lovely to our companions. Yet we can see and appreciate the beauties of nature, the dainty flowers and trees, and green fields, and the clear blue of the sky.
What about the birds and beasts and fishes? Asked Zeb.
The birds we cannot see, because they love to eat the damas as much as we do, yet we hear the sweet songs and enjoy them. Neither can we see the cruel bears, for they also eat the fruit. But the fishes that swim in our brooks we can see, and we often catch them to eat.
It occurs to me you have a great deal to make you happy, even while invisible, remarked the wizard. Nevertheless, we prefer to remain visible while we are in your valley.
Just then Eureka came in, for she had been until now wandering outside with Jim, and when the kitten saw the table set with food, she cried out,
You must feed me now, Dorothy. I am half starved.
The children were inclined to be frightened by the sight of a small animal, which reminded them of the bears, but Dorothy assured them that by explaining that Eureka was a pet and could do no harm, even if she wished to. Then, as the others had by this time moved away from the table, the kitten sprang upon a chair and put her paws on the cloth to see what there was to eat. To her surprise, an unseen hand clutched her and held her suspended in the air. Eureka was frantic with terror and tried to scratch and bite, so the next moment she was dropped to the floor.
Did you see that, Dorothy?
She gasped.
Yes, dear, her mistress replied. There are people living in this house, although we cannot see them, and you must have better manners, Eureka, or something worse will happen to you.
She placed a plate of food upon the floor, and the kitten ate greedily.
Give me that nice smelling fruit that's on the table,
she begged, and when she had cleaned her plate,
Those are damas, said Dorothy. You must never even taste them, Eureka, or you'll get invisible, and we can't see you at all.
The kitten gazed wistfully at the forbidden fruit.
Does it hurt to be invisible?
She asked.
I don't know,
Dorothy answered,
but it hurt me dreadfully to lose you. Very well, I won't touch it, decided the kitten. but you must keep it away from me, for the smell is very tempting.
Can you tell us, sir or madam, the wizard addressing the air because he did not quite know where the unseen people stood, if there is any way we can get out of your beautiful valley and on top of the earth again? Oh, one can leave the valley easily enough, answered the man's voice, but to do so you must enter a far less pleasant country. For reaching the top of the earth, I have never heard that it is possible to do that, and if you succeeded in getting there, you would probably fall off.
Oh no, said Dorothy. We've been there, and we know.
The Valley of the Voe is certainly a charming place, resumed the wizard, but we cannot be contented in any other land than our own for long. Even if we should come to unpleasant places on our way, it is necessary, in order to reach the earth's surface, to keep moving it on forward. In that place, said the man, it will be best for you to cross our valley and mount the spiral staircase inside the Pyramid Mountain. The top of that mountain is lost in the clouds, and when you reach it, you will be in the awful land of the Knot, where the gargoyles live. What are gargoyles? Asked Zeb. I do not know, young sir. Our greatest champion, Overman Anu, once climbed the spiral stairway and fought 9 days with the gargoyles before he could escape them and come back. But he could never be induced to describe the dreadful creatures, and soon afterward a bear caught him and ate him up. The wanderers were rather discouraged by this gloomy report, but Dorothy said with a sigh,
If the only way we can get home is to meet gargoyles, then we've got to meet them. They can't be worse than the Wicked Witch or the Gnome King.
But you must remember you had the Scarecrow and the 10 Woodmen to help you to conquer those enemies, suggested the wizard. Just now, my dear, there is not a single warrior in our company.
Well, I guess Zeb could fight if he had to. Couldn't you, Zeb?
Asked the little girl.
Perhaps if I had to, answered Zeb doubtfully. And you have a jointed sword that you chop the vegetable sorcerer in two with, the girl said to the little man.
True, he replied, and in my satchel are other useful things to fight with. What the gargoyles most dread is a noise, said the man's voice. Our champion told me that when he shouted his battle cry, the creatures shuddered and drew back, hesitating to continue the combat. But they were in great numbers, and the champion could not shout much because he had to save his breath for fighting. Very good, said the wizard. We can all yell better than we can fight, so we ought to defeat the gargoyles.
But tell me, said Dorothy, how did such a brave champion happen to let the bears eat him? If he was real invisible and the bears invisible, who knows that they really ate him up?
Champion killed 11 bears in his time, returned the unseen man, and we know this to be true because when dead creature is dead, the invisible charm of the Dharma fruit ceases to be active, and the slain one can plainly be seen by all eyes. When the champion killed a bear, everyone could see it, and when the bears killed the champion, we all saw several pieces of him scattered around, which of course disappeared again when the bears devoured them. Now they bade farewell to the kind but unseen people of the cottage. After the man had called their attention to a high, pyramid-shaped mountain on the opposite side of the valley, and told them how to travel in order to reach it, they again started upon their journey. They followed the course of a broad stream and passed several more pretty cottages, but of course they saw no one, nor did anyone speak to them. The fruits and flowers grew plentifully about, and there were many of the delicious damas that the people of the Voe were so fond of. About noon they stopped to allow Jem to rest in the shade of a pretty orchard, and while they plucked and ate some of the cherries and plums that grew there, a soft voice suddenly said to them,
There are bears nearby. Be careful.
The wizard got out his sword at once, and Zeb grabbed his horsewhip. Dorothy climbed into the buggy, although Jem had been unharnessed from it, and was gazing some distance away. The owner of the unseen voice laughed lightly and said,
You cannot escape the bears that way. How can we escape?
Asked Dorothy nervously, for an unseen danger is always the hardest to face.
You must take to the river, was the reply. The bears will not venture upon the water. But we will be drowned.
Oh, there's no need of that, said the voice, which's gentle tones seemed to belong to a young girl.
You are strangers in the Valley of Voe, and do not seem to know our ways, so I will try to save you.
Next moment, a broad-leafed plant was jerked from the ground where it grew, and held suspended in the air above the wizard.
Sir, said the voice, you must rub these leaves upon your soles of your feet, and then you will be able to walk on the water without sinking below the surface. It is a secret the bears do not know, and we the people of Voe usually walk upon the water when we travel, and so to escape our enemies.
"Thank you," cried the wizard joyfully, and at once rubbed the leaf upon the soles of Dorothy's shoes and upon his own. The girl took a leaf and rubbed it upon the kitten's paws, and the rest of the plant was handed to Zeb, who, after applying it to his own feet, carefully rubbed it upon all four of Jim's hooves, and then upon the tires of the buggy wheels. He had nearly finished his task when a low growling was suddenly heard, and the horse began to jump around and kick viciously with its heels.
"Quick, to the water, or you are lost!"
cried the unseen friend, and without hesitation the wizard drew the buggy down the bank and out upon the broad river, for Dorothy was still seated in it, with Eureka in her arms. They did not sink, owing to the virtues of the strange plant they had used, and when the buggy was in the middle of the stream, the wizard returned to the bank to assess Zeb and Jim. The horse was plunging about madly, and 2 or 3 deep gashes appeared on its flanks, from which the blood flowed freely. "Run to the river!" shouted the wizard, and Jim quickly freed himself from his unseen tormentors by a few vicious kicks, then obeyed. As soon as he trotted upon the surface of the river, he found himself safe from pursuit, and Zeb was already running across the water towards Dorothy. When the little wizard turned to follow them, he felt a hot breath against his cheek and heard a low, fierce growl. At once he began stabbing in the air with his sword, and he threw the blade that had stuck in the substance. When he drew back the blade, it was dripping blood. For the 3rd time he had thrust out the weapon, and there was a loud roar and a fall, and suddenly at his feet appeared the form of a great red bear, which was nearly as big as the horse, and much stronger and fiercer. The beast was quite dead from the sword thrusts, and after a glance of its terrible claws and sharp teeth, the little man turned in a panic and rushed out upon the water, for other menacing growls told him more bears were near. On the river, however, the adventurers seemed perfectly safe. Dorothy and the buggy had floated slowly down the stream with the current of the water, and the others made haste to join her. The wizard opened a satchel and got out some sticking plaster, with which he mended the cuts that Jim had received from the claws of the bears.
"I think we'd better stick to the river after this," said Dorothy. "If our unknown friend hadn't warned us and told us what to do, we would all be dead by this time."
"That is true," agreed the wizard. "And the river seems to be flowing in the direction of the Pyramid Mountain, so it will be the easiest way for us to travel." Zeb hitched Jim to the buggy again, and the horse trotted along and drew them rapidly over the smooth water. The kitten was at first dreadfully afraid of getting wet, but Dorothy led her down, and soon Eureka was frisking along beside the buggy without being scared a bit. Once a little fish swam too near to the surface, and the kitten grabbed it in her mouth and ate it up as quick as a wink. But Dorothy cautioned her to be careful what she ate in the Valley of Enchantments, and no more fishes were careless enough to swim within her reach. After a journey of several hours, they came to a point where the river curved, and they found they must cross a mile or so of the valley before they came to the Pyramid Mountain. There were few houses in this part, and few orchards and flowers, so our friends feared they might encounter more of the savage bears, which they had learned to dread with all their hearts. "You'll have to make a dash, Jim," said the wizard, "and run as fast as you can."
"All right," answered the horse. "I'll do my best, but you must remember I am old, and my dashing days are past and gone."
All 3 got into the buggy, and Zeb picked up the reins, though Jim needed no guidance of any sort. The horse was still smarting from the sharp claws of invisible bears, and as soon as he was on land and headed toward the mountain, the thought that more of those fearsome creatures might be near acted as a spur and sent him galloping along the way that made Dorothy catch her breath. Then Zeb, in a spirit of mischief, uttered a growl like that of the bears, and Jim's ears pricked up and fairly flew. His bony legs moved so fast that they could scarcely be seen, and the wizard clung fast to the seat and yelled, "Whoa!" at the top of his voice.
"I'm afraid he's running away,"
gasped Dorothy. "I know he is," said Zeb. "No bear can catch him if he keeps up at this gait, and the harness of the buggy don't break." Jim did not make a mile a minute, but almost before they were aware of it, he drew up to the door of the mountain, so suddenly that the wizard and Zeb both sailed over the dashboard and landed in the soft grass, where they rolled several times before they stopped. Dorothy nearly went with them, but she was holding fast to the iron rail of the seat, and that saved her. She squeezed the kitten, though, until it screeched, and the old cab horse made several curious sounds that led the little girl to suspect he was laughing at all of them. Chapter 10. The Braided Man of Pyramid Mountain. The mountain before them was shaped like a cone, and was so tall that its point was lost in the clouds. Directly facing the place where Jim had stopped was an arched opening leading to a broad stairway. The stairs were cut in the rock beside the mountain, and they were broad and not very steep, because they circled around like a corkscrew. And at the arched opening where the flight began, a circle was quite big. At the foot of the stairs, there was a sign reading, "Warning, these steps lead to the land of the gargoyles. Danger, keep out."
I wonder how Jim is ever going to draw the buggy up so many stairs, Dorothy said gravely.
No trouble at all,
declared the horse with a contemptuous neigh.
Still, I don't dare to drag any passengers. You'll have to walk.
Suppose the stairs get steeper, suggested Zeb doubtfully.
Then you'll have to boost the buggy wheels, that's all, answered Jim.
We'll try it anyway, said the wizard. It's the only way to get out of the Valley of Voe.
So they began to ascend the stairs, Dorothy and the wizard first, Jim next, drawing the buggy, then Zeb to watch that nothing happened to the harness. The light was dim, and they soon mounted into total darkness, so that the wizard was obliged to get out his lanterns to light the way. But this enabled them to proceed steadily until they came to a landing where there was a rift in the side of the mountain that led both in light and air. Looking through this opening, they could see the Valley of the Voe lying far below them, the cottages seeming like toy houses from that distance. After resting a few moments, they resumed their climb, and still the stairs were broad and low enough for Jim to draw the buggy easily after him. The old horse panted a little, and had to stop often to get his breath. At such times they were glad to wait for him, for continually climbing up the stairs is sure to make one's legs ache. They wound about, always going upwards for some time. The light from the lanterns dimly showed the way, but it was a gloomy journey, and they were pleased when a streak of light ahead of them assured them they were coming to a second landing. Here, one side of the mountain had a great hole in it, like the mouth of a cavern, and the stairs stopped at the near edge of the floor, and commenced ascending again on the opposite edge. The opening in the mountain was now on the side opposite the Valley of Voe, and our travelers looked out upon the strange scene. Below them was a vast space, at the bottom of which was a black sea with rolling billows, through which little tongues of flame constantly shot up. Just above them, and almost on a level with their platform, were banks of rolling clouds, which constantly shifted position and changing color. The blues and grays were very beautiful, and Dorothy noticed that on the cloud banks sat or reclined fleecily, shadowy forms of beautiful beings who must have been the cloud fairies. Mortals who stand upon the earth and look up at the sky cannot often distinguish these forms, but our friends were now so near the clouds that they observed the dainty fairies very clearly.
"Are they real?"
asked Zeb in an odd voice.
"Of course," replied Dorothy. "They're the cloud fairies."
"They seem like open work," remarked the boy, gazing intently. "If I should squeeze one, there wouldn't be anything left of it." But the open space between the clouds and the black, bubbling sea far beneath could be seen an occasional strange bird winging its way swiftly through the air. These birds were of enormous size, and reminded Zeb of the rocks he had read about in the Arabian Nights. They had fierce eyes and sharp talons and beaks, and the children hoped none of them would venture into the cavern.
"Well, I declare!" suddenly exclaimed the little wizard. "What in the world is this?"
They turned around and found a man standing in the floor in the center of the cave, who bowed very politely when he saw he had attracted attention. He was a very old man, bent nearly double, but the queerest thing about him was his white hair and beard. These were so long that they reached his feet, and both the hair and the beard were carefully plaited into many braids, and at the end of each braid was fastened a bow of colored ribbon.
"Where did you come from?"
asked Dorothy, wonderfully.
"No place at all," answered the man with the braids. "That is, not recently. Once I lived on top of the earth, but for many years I have had my factory in this spot, halfway up the Pyramid Mountain."
"Are we only halfway up?" inquired the boy in a discouraged tone.
"I believe so, my lad," replied the braided man. "But as I have never been in either direction, up or down, since I arrived, I cannot be positive whether it is exactly halfway or not."
"Have you a factory in this place?" asked the wizard, who had been examining the strange personage carefully.
To be sure, said the other. I am a great inventor, you must know, and I manufacture my products in this lonely spot.
"What are your products?" inquired the wizard.
Well, I make assorted flutters for flags and bunting, and a superior grade of rustles for ladies' silk gowns.
"I thought so," said the wizard with a sigh. "May we examine some of these articles?"
Yes, indeed. Come into my shop, please.
And the braided man turned and led the way into a smaller cave where he evidently lived. Here on a broad shelf were several cardboard boxes of various sizes, each tied with a cotton cord.
This,
said the man, taking a box and handing it gently,
contains 12 dozen rustles, enough to last a lady a year. Will you buy it, my dear?
He asked, addressing Dorothy.
My gown isn't silk, she said, smiling.
Never mind. When you open the box, the rustles will escape, whether you are wearing silk dress or not,
said the man seriously. Then he picked up another box.
In this, he continued, are assorted flutters. They're invaluable to make flags flutter on a still day, when there is no wind. You, sir, turning to the wizard, ought to have this assortment. Once you have tried my goods, I am sure you will never be without them.
I have no money with me, said the wizard evasively.
I do not want money, replied the braided man, for I could not spend it here in this deserted place if I had it. But I would very much like a blue hair ribbon. You will notice my braids are tied with yellow, pink, brown, red, green, white, and black, but I have no blue ribbons.
I'll get you one,
cried Dorothy, who was very sorry for the poor man. So she ran back to the buggy and took from her suitcase a pretty blue ribbon. It did her good to see how the braided man's eyes sparkled when he received this treasure.
You have made me very, very happy, my dear, he exclaimed.
Then he insisted on the wizard taking the box of flutters, and the little girl accepted the box of rustles.
You may need them sometime, he said, and there is really no use of my manufacturing these things unless somebody uses them.
Why did you leave the surface of the earth? Inquired the wizard.
I could not help it. It is a sad story, but if you will try to restrain your tears, I will tell you about it. On Earth, I was a manufacturer of imported holes for American Swiss cheese, and I will acknowledge that I supplied a superior article, which was in great demand. I also made pores for porous platters and high-grade holes for donuts and buttons. Finally, I invented a new adjustable post hole, which I thought would make my fortune. I manufactured a large quantity of these post holes, and having no room in which to store them, I set them all end to end and put it on top of the ground. That made an extraordinarily long hole, as you may imagine. It reached far down into the earth, and as I leaned over to try to see the bottom, I lost my balance and tumbled in. Unfortunately, the hole led directly into this vast space you see outside this mountain, but I managed to catch a point of the rock that projected from this cavern, and saved myself from tumbling headlong into the black waves beneath, where the tongues of flame that dart out would certainly have consumed me. Here, then, I made my home, and although it is a lonely place, I amuse myself making rustles and flutters, and so get along very nicely.
The braided man had completed his strange tale, and Dorothy nearly laughed, because it was so absurd. But the wizard tapped his forehead significantly to indicate that he thought the poor man was crazy, so they politely bade him a good day, and went back to the outer cavern to resume their journey.